What if you had the chance to sit with someone truly wise, someone facing death, and ask the most important questions about life, love, and meaning? In Tuesdays with Morrie, Mitch Albom reconnects with his beloved college professor, Morrie Schwartz, who is dying from ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. What begins as a casual visit turns into a series of profound conversations every Tuesday. Lessons on how to live meaningfully, even as death approaches. The memoir is both touching and transformative, inviting readers to reflect on what really matters before it's too late. Here are 10 lessons from Tuesdays with Morrie. 1. Love is the most important thing. Morrie emphasizes that love gives life meaning. Without love, we are birds with broken wings. Love for others, through kindness, empathy, and connection, is what nourishes the soul. Imagine sitting in a quiet study, sunlight streaming through a window, a small hibiscus plant shedding its pink petals nearby. Across from you is an old man, frail and confined to a wheelchair, his body ravaged by a merciless disease called ALS. Yet his eyes sparkle with life, his voice carries a warmth that wraps around you like a hug, and his words cut straight to your heart. This was my reality every Tuesday in 1995 as I sat with my old college professor, Morrie Schwartz, in his West Newton, Massachusetts home. I was Mitch Albom, a sports journalist caught up in the whirlwind of ambition, and Morrie was my mentor, my coach, teaching me one final, profound lesson. Love is the most important thing. In a world obsessed with money, fame, and fleeting distractions, Morrie's life and death were a testament to the enduring power of love for others, for oneself, and for the fleeting moments we're given. Let me take you through the moments in Tuesdays with Morrie that showed me how love shapes a life worth living. The 9th Tuesday, love goes on. Our 9th Tuesday together was a turning point. By then, Morrie's body was failing fast. His legs were useless, his hands trembled, and he needed help with the simplest tasks: eating, moving, even breathing. Yet, as we sat at his dining room table, the hardwood floor glowing in the afternoon light, Morrie's voice was steady, his mind sharp. He leaned forward, his sunken eyes locking onto mine, and said, "Love is how you stay alive, even after you are gone." I felt a shiver. He wasn't talking about romantic love alone, though that was part of it. He meant the deep, human connection that binds us to family, friends, and even strangers, the kind of love that lingers in memories, in shared laughter, in the quiet comfort of being understood. Morrie's life was a living example of this. Even as ALS stripped away his physical strength, his home buzzed with love. Friends and colleagues streamed in, not out of pity, but because Morrie had always been a listener, a giver. He'd created a cocoon of human activities, discussion groups, walks with friends, dancing alone to Jimi Hendrix in a Harvard Square church. Now, as he faced death, those connections held him up. His wife, Charlotte, was a constant presence, managing his care with quiet strength. His sons, Rob and John, were there, their love a steady anchor. Morrie told me, "I may be dying, but I am surrounded by loving, caring souls." How many people can say that? I thought of my own life, my big house, my packed schedule, my marriage to Janine, which I often sidelined for work. How many loving souls surrounded me? I wasn't sure. Morrie's words echoed a lesson from our college days. Back at Brandeis in the 1970s, when I was a scrappy kid in gray sweatshirts dreaming of being a musician, Morrie would talk about the tension of opposites, life as a pull between what you want and what you're bound to do. Which side wins? I'd asked him once, sitting under a tree outside the sociology building. He'd smiled, his crooked teeth flashing, and said, "Love wins. Love always wins." Now, decades later, he was proving it. Love wasn't just a feeling, it was a choice, an action, a legacy. He showed it by welcoming visitors, by listening to their problems even as he struggled to breathe, by smiling through his pain to make others feel at ease. The living funeral, love in action. One of the most powerful examples of Morrie's love came before I re-entered his life. In the book, he describes a living funeral he held in 1995, a cold Sunday afternoon when he was still mobile enough to sit among friends and family. Knowing his time was short, Morrie didn't want to wait until he was gone to hear the heartfelt words we often leave unsaid. So he invited a small group to his home, and they gathered to celebrate him while he could still hear their voices. Some cried, some laughed, and one woman read a poem comparing Morrie to a tender sequoia, her words capturing his enduring strength and gentleness. Morrie cried and laughed too, soaking in the love. All the heartfelt things we never get to say to those we love, Morrie said that day. I wrote in the book. It was a rousing success, not because it delayed his death, but because it filled his heart with the love he'd given others, reflected back. This living funeral wasn't just for Morrie. It was a lesson for everyone there. He showed us that love means being present, saying what matters, and not waiting for a perfect moment that might never come. I thought about my own family, my brother, Peter, who was battling cancer in Spain and dodging my calls. I'd let years slip by without telling him I loved him. Morrie's example pushed me to reach out later, to say those words and rebuild our connection, even if it was through a quirky, all-caps fax signed Sore Tush. The 14th Tuesday, a final act of love. Our final Tuesday together, just days before Morrie's death, was the ultimate expression of his belief in love. I walked into his bedroom, where he lay under a yellow pajama top, his body so withered he looked like a child. His mouth was open, his skin pale and tight against his cheekbones. I forced a smile, but my heart sank. This was goodbye. Morrie could barely speak, his voice a raspy whisper, but he managed to say, "My dear friend." I held his fragile hands, feeling them disappear in mine, and leaned close to his face. His new white whiskers brushed my cheek, a stark reminder of life draining from him. "Coach," I said, using the nickname we'd shared for years. "I don't know how to say goodbye." He patted my hand weakly, resting it on his heart, and rasped, "This is how we say goodbye. Love you." I told him I loved him too, my voice cracking. His eyes, small and teary, met mine. "No, you do know something else. You always have." In that moment, I felt the weight of his love, not just for me, but for everyone he'd touched. He was teaching me, even in his final breaths, that love is the bridge that carries us beyond death. I held him close, rubbing his loose skin, stroking his hair, feeling his tears against my palm. It was the most intimate moment we'd ever shared, a silent vow that our connection would endure. Morrie died a few days later, on November 4th, 1995, alone in his bed, as if sparing his family the pain of witnessing his last breath. At his funeral, I stood by his grave on a hill overlooking a pond, and I imagined talking to him, as he'd asked, "You talk, I'll listen." It was a Tuesday, and I felt his love in the quiet, in the memory of his smile, in the lessons he'd left behind. Death ends a life, not a relationship, he'd said on our 13th Tuesday, and I knew he was right. His love lived on, in his family, his friends, and in me. Love in the everyday, Morrie's philosophy. Morrie's belief in love wasn't abstract, it was woven into his daily life. He showed it in small, deliberate acts. When I visited, he insisted on feeding me, even though he could barely eat himself. His helper, Connie, would bring out bread, tomatoes, chicken salad, and hummus, and Morrie would watch me eat with a satisfied smile, as if nourishing me nourished him. He'd ask about my life, my marriage, my work, my dreams, not out of curiosity, but because he cared deeply. Even when he was too weak to move, he'd listen to his visitors' problems, offering wisdom despite his pain. Love is when you are as concerned about someone else's situation as you are about your own, he told me on the 13th Tuesday, when we talked about my brother. That was Morrie's love in action, selfless, present, and unwavering. He also taught me about self-love, a harder lesson for me to grasp. On the 12th Tuesday, as I massaged his calloused, lifeless feet, he spoke about forgiveness. Forgive yourself before you die. Then forgive others. He admitted to regretting his pride, like when he'd cut off his friend Norman over a misunderstanding. But he'd learned to make peace with himself, to accept his imperfections. You can't get stuck on the regrets of what should have happened, he said. That was love, too. Loving yourself enough to let go of guilt and embrace the time you have. Morrie's love extended beyond personal relationships. He believed in loving humanity, in taking responsibility for each other. During his third Nightline interview, when Ted Koppel asked for his final words to the world, Morrie whispered, "Be compassionate and take responsibility for each other. If we only learned those lessons, this world would be so much better a place." His mantra, "Love each other or die," wasn't just a phrase. It was a call to action, a reminder that love is the foundation of a meaningful life. Morrie's lessons about love changed me. After his death, I reached out to my brother, Peter, and told him I loved him, words I'd never said before. His response, a fax full of humor and heart, was a small victory, a step toward rebuilding our bond. I began to question my own life, my obsession with work, my neglect of the people I loved. Morrie's love, his warmth, his listening ear, his fearless honesty, showed me what I was missing. He taught me that love isn't just grand gestures. It's in the everyday moments, a shared meal, a kind word, a moment of presence. As I wrote in Tuesdays with Morrie, this book was our final thesis, a way to share his love with the world. It's touched millions since 1997, from young readers to parents sharing it with their kids. Morrie's love lives on in every reader who picks up the book, in every person who pauses to call a loved one or forgive an old grudge. His classroom has no walls, no end. As long as we can love each other and remember the feeling of love we had, we can die without ever really going away, he said on the 13th Tuesday. That's the gift Morrie gave me, and it's the gift I pass to you. Love fiercely, love simply, love now, because, as Morrie showed me, it's the only thing that truly lasts. 2. Accept death to embrace life. Morrie teaches that accepting death frees us to live fully. Denying mortality only leads to fear and distraction. By confronting death, we appreciate the present moment more deeply. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of an oxygen machine in the corner. Sunlight filtered through a window, catching the pink petals of a hibiscus plant as they fell, one by one, to the floor. Across from me sat Morrie Schwartz, my old college professor, his body frail from ALS, his eyes alive with a wisdom that seemed to defy his fading strength. It was 1995, and every Tuesday, I, Mitch Albom, a sports journalist lost in the chase for success, flew to West Newton, Massachusetts, to sit with my coach and learn about life. Morrie was dying, and he knew it. But instead of hiding from death, he faced it head-on, teaching me a lesson that changed how I saw everything. To accept death is to embrace life. In Tuesdays with Morrie, Morrie showed me that by understanding our mortality, we can live with purpose, presence, and joy. Let me share the moments that brought this lesson to life. The 6th Tuesday, learning how to die. On our 6th Tuesday, Morrie's study felt like a sanctuary, its bookshelves and warm light a contrast to the chaos of my life. Deadlines, phone calls, coffee spills in my rental car. Morrie was weaker now, his legs lifeless, his hands trembling as he gestured. Yet his voice carried a quiet strength as he said, "Once you learn how to die, you learn how to live." I leaned forward, puzzled. How could facing death teach me about life? Morrie explained that most people sleepwalk through their days, chasing things, money, fame, status, because they don't believe death is real. They don't see how brief life is, he said, his blue-green eyes locking onto mine. But when you accept that you will die, you start paying attention to what matters. Morrie was living proof of this. Diagnosed with ALS in 1994, given 2 years at most, he chose to make his death his final project. He didn't retreat into despair or denial. Instead, he embraced his mortality, using it as a lens to see life more clearly. He told me about his mornings, when he'd detach himself, feeling his emotions fully, fear, sadness, gratitude, before letting them go. This practice, he said, helped him focus on the present, the taste of a bite of food, the sound of a friend's voice, the beauty of his hibiscus plant. "I'm more alive now than I was before I got sick," he said, a faint smile on his lips. I thought of my own life, how I rushed through moments, always planning the next article, the next trip. What was I missing by ignoring the ticking clock? The living funeral, facing death with courage. One of the most striking examples of Morrie's acceptance of death came before I reconnected with him. In the book, he describes a living funeral he held in 1995, when he could still sit upright and greet his guests. Knowing ALS would soon claim him, Morrie didn't want to miss the chance to hear the love and gratitude people often save for after someone's gone. On a cold Sunday, he gathered friends and family in his home. They shared stories, tears, and laughter. A woman read a poem, calling Morrie a tender sequoia, capturing his gentle strength. Morrie cried, laughed, and soaked it all in. "It's better than any funeral," he told me later, his eyes sparkling. "I got to hear how I touched their lives while I'm still here." This living funeral wasn't about mourning. It was about celebrating life by acknowledging death. Morrie faced his end with courage, not fear, and it freed him to live more fully in the time he had left. He told me, "If you accept you're going to die, you don't waste time on things that don't matter." For Morrie, that meant more time with loved ones, more moments of connection, less worry about trivialities like pride or appearances. I thought of my own hesitations, how I'd avoided calling my brother, Peter, who was battling cancer in Spain, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Morrie's example nudged me to act, to not let fear of loss keep me from living now. The 13th Tuesday, death as a natural step. By our 13th Tuesday, Morrie was confined to his bed, his breathing labored, his body a shadow of the vibrant man I'd known at Brandeis in the 1970s. We talked about death again, but this time, it felt closer, more real. I asked if he was afraid. "Not of death itself," he whispered, his voice faint but clear. "It's natural, Mitch. Like birth. I'm just not ready to lose my connection to others." Morrie saw death as a step, not an end. He wasn't religious in a traditional sense, but he believed in a continuity of love and relationships. As long as we can love each other and remember the feeling of love we had, we can die without ever really going away, he said. His words hit me hard. I imagined losing him, and it hurt, but his calm acceptance made me see death differently, not as a thief, but as part of life's rhythm. Morrie's acceptance shaped how he lived those final weeks. Even as he weakened, he stayed present, savoring small joys. He'd ask his helper, Connie, to read him letters from strangers moved by his Nightline interviews. He'd listen to music, letting it wash over him. Once, he described his perfect day, eating sweet rolls, swimming in a pool, walking in a garden, and dancing with friends until he was exhausted. It wasn't grand or exotic. It was simple, rooted in connection and sensation. By accepting death, Morrie had stripped away the noise, focusing on what made life beautiful. I compared it to my own days, filled with work and worry, and felt a pang of envy for his clarity. The 14th Tuesday, a goodbye rooted in life. Our final Tuesday was the hardest. Morrie lay in bed, his face pale, his whiskers white against his sunken cheeks. He could barely speak, his breath a shallow rasp. I held his fragile hands, feeling them slip away in mine, and said, "Coach, I don't know how to say goodbye." He patted my hand, resting it on his heart, and whispered, "This is how we say goodbye. Love you." His eyes, teary but steady, told me he wasn't afraid. He was still teaching, showing me that accepting death meant embracing the love we'd shared, the lessons he'd given me. I kissed his cheek, lingering, hoping to give him one last moment of warmth. As I left, he said, "Okay then," and I saw a flicker of peace in his gaze. Morrie died days later, on November 4th, 1995, alone in his bed, as if choosing a quiet exit. At his funeral, on a windy Tuesday, I stood by his grave and imagined talking to him, as he'd asked, "You talk, I'll listen." His acceptance of death had freed him to live fully until the end, and it left me with a challenge, to live with the same awareness. I thought of his words from the 6th Tuesday, "When you're in bed, you're dead." Morrie wasn't talking about physical death, but about giving up on life. By facing his mortality, he'd stayed out of that bed, spiritually alive until his last breath. Morrie's lesson, accept death to embrace life, changed me. After his death, I reached out to my brother, Peter, telling him I loved him, refusing to let fear of loss keep us apart. I started questioning my life's pace, my obsession with work over connection. Morrie's example, from his living funeral to his final words, showed me that death isn't something to run from. It's a teacher, urging us to prioritize love, presence, and meaning. His mantra, "Once you learn how to die, you learn how to live," echoes in Tuesdays with Morrie, touching millions who read the book since 1997. Morrie's classroom lives on, inviting us to face our mortality not with fear, but with courage, so we can live more deeply today. So, pause, look at the hibiscus petals in your own life, and ask, what matters most? Because, as Morrie taught me, life is fleeting, but love endures. 3. Live authentically, not according to social expectations. Many of us chase material success and external validation. Morrie urges Mitch and us to define our own values and live by them, not by what society sells as success. The hardwood floor of Morrie Schwartz's study gleamed under the afternoon light, a hibiscus plant by the window dropping its delicate pink petals like a gentle clock ticking down. It was 1995, and every Tuesday, I, Mitch Albom, left behind my frantic life as a Detroit sports journalist to sit with my old college professor in West Newton, Massachusetts. Morrie, my coach, was dying of ALS, his body wasting away, but his spirit burned bright, his words cutting through the noise of my ambition-charged world. Among his many lessons, one struck me deeply: live authentically, not according to social expectations. In a society pushing money, status, and youth, Morrie showed me how to reject those hollow scripts and embrace a life true to my heart. Let me take you through the moments in Tuesdays with Morrie that taught me to be real in a world that often demands pretense. The first Tuesday, rejecting a broken culture. Our first Tuesday set the stage. I arrived frazzled, my mind tangled with deadlines and the buzz of my cell phone. Morrie, propped in his wheelchair, looked frail but radiant, his eyes twinkling as he asked, "Mitch, are you at peace with yourself?" I squirmed. Peace. I was too busy chasing success, writing columns, appearing on TV, buying a big house, to even consider it. Morrie saw right through me. "The culture we have does not make people feel good about themselves," he said, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. "We're taught to chase money, power, fame. If it doesn't work for you, don't buy it. Create your own." Morrie had lived this truth long before ALS. Back in the 1970s, when I was his student at Brandeis, he was an oddball professor, dancing alone to Jimi Hendrix in a Harvard Square church, leading discussion groups on human connection, and helping the poor through a project called Greenhouse. He didn't care about academic prestige or material wealth. His office was cluttered with books and ideas, not trophies. Now, facing death, he was even more defiant of society's rules. "I'm not going to be ashamed of dying," he told me, rejecting the expectation to hide his illness. Instead, he made it his final project, sharing his journey on Nightline with Ted Koppel, inviting friends to visit, and teaching me to prioritize love and community over the rat race I'd been running. The seventh Tuesday, embracing age, defying youth obsession. By our seventh Tuesday, Morrie's body was failing further. He could no longer walk or dance, his arms too weak to lift a fork. Yet his spirit refused to bow to society's obsession with youth. We talked about aging, a topic I dreaded, already noticing my own thinning hair in my mid-30s. "Mitch, if you're always battling against getting older, you're always going to be unhappy," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Aging is not just decay, it's growth." Morrie embraced his age, finding joy in being present, even as his body betrayed him. He laughed about his dependence on others, saying, "I'm an old man, and I'm okay with that." This was radical authenticity. Society tells us to fight aging, buy anti-wrinkle creams, chase eternal youth, hide our vulnerabilities. Morrie rejected that. He let his white whiskers grow, spoke openly about his physical decline, and found meaning in his limitations. "I'm more interesting now," he said, "because I've lived more, loved more." His example made me question my own fears of aging, my fixation on staying relevant in a youth-driven media world. Morrie showed me that authenticity means accepting who you are, at any age, not what society expects you to be. The 10th Tuesday, building your own subculture. On our 10th Tuesday, Morrie's lesson hit closer to home. We talked about marriage, but the conversation veered to how society shapes our priorities. I admitted I'd been neglecting my wife, Janine, sidelining our relationship for work. Morrie nodded, unsurprised. "People are only mean when they're threatened," he said, "and our culture threatens them constantly, telling them they're not rich enough, not successful enough." He urged me to reject those threats and build my own little subculture. For Morrie, that meant a life of connection. His discussion groups, his greenhouse project, his open-door policy for students like me in the 1970s. Even now, his home was a hub of love, with friends visiting, his wife, Charlotte, by his side, and his sons, Rob and John, offering unwavering support. Morrie's subculture wasn't about wealth or status. It was about being human. He told me a story from his childhood when his mother died, and he felt society's pressure to move on, to be strong. Instead, he honored his grief, carrying her memory authentically. Now, as he faced ALS, he did the same, refusing to pretend he was fine or hide his tears. "I'm not what the world expects," he said, "and that's my freedom." His words challenged me to rethink my life, my big house on a hill, my endless work hours. Was I living for me, or for society's applause? The living funeral. Authenticity in the face of death. One of Morrie's most powerful acts of authenticity was his living funeral, described early in the book. In 1995, before I reconnected with him, Morrie, still able to sit among loved ones, gathered friends and family to celebrate his life while he was alive. Society expects us to mourn after death, to save our love for eulogies. Morrie flipped that script. On a cold Sunday, his guests shared stories, tears, and laughter. A woman read a poem, calling him a tender sequoia, capturing his gentle strength. Morrie cried and laughed, fully present. "I got to hear how I mattered," he told me later, his eyes bright. "Why wait until I'm gone?" This living funeral was Morrie living authentically, defying the expectation to go quietly into death. He didn't care if it seemed unconventional. He wanted to feel the love he'd given, to be real with those he cared about. It inspired me to reach out to my brother, Peter, who was battling cancer in Spain and avoiding my calls. Morrie's authenticity, his refusal to let social norms dictate his final days, pushed me to be honest with Peter, to say, "I love you despite the awkwardness," forging a connection that society's busyness had nearly erased. The 14th Tuesday, an authentic goodbye. Our final Tuesday, just days before Morrie's death, was the ultimate lesson in authenticity. He lay in bed, his body childlike, his whiskers stark white against his pale skin. His voice was a whisper, but his eyes held no pretense. "My dear friend," he rasped, calling me by the bond we'd rebuilt. I held his hands, feeling their fragility, and admitted, "Coach, I don't know how to say goodbye. Society tells us to be stoic, to hide our tears." Morrie rejected that. He patted my hand, placed it on his heart, and said, "This is how we say goodbye. Love you." Tears rolled down his cheeks, and I let mine fall too. He didn't hide his fear or his love, and neither did I. Morrie died on November 4th, 1995, alone in his bed, as if choosing a final act of quiet authenticity. At his funeral, on a windy Tuesday, I stood by his grave, imagining our talks. His life, unapologetically real, unbound by social expectations, left me a challenge, to live true to myself, not the world's demands. His words from the first Tuesday echoed, "Create your own culture." I began to try, starting with Peter, whose quirky fax response, signed Sortush, was a step toward real connection. Morrie's lesson, "Live authentically, not according to social expectations," reshaped me. After his death, I questioned my career's grip on my life, my neglect of Janine, my chase for society's approval. Morrie's examples, from his living funeral to his fearless aging, showed me that authenticity means honoring your values, love, connection, presence, over society's false gods of wealth and youth. His mantra, "Don't buy the culture if it doesn't work," lives in Tuesdays with Morrie, inspiring millions since 1997 to carve their own paths. Morrie's classroom has no walls, urging us to be real, to reject the scripts, to live as our true selves. So, look at your life, at the hibiscus petals falling, and ask, are you living for you, or for the world? Because, as Morrie taught me, only authenticity brings peace. 4. Give to others, even as you decline. Despite his illness, Morrie gives of himself, his wisdom, time, and vulnerability. He teaches that giving is not about what you have, but what you choose to share. The soft glow of afternoon light spilled into Morrie Schwartz's study, where a hibiscus plant by the window shed its pink petals, a quiet reminder of time slipping away. It was 1995, and every Tuesday, I, Mitch Albom, a sports journalist consumed by ambition, sat with my old college professor in West Newton, Massachusetts. Morrie, my coach, was dying of ALS, his body surrendering to a disease that stole his strength but not his spirit. As his limbs weakened and his breath grew shallow, Morrie taught me a lesson that shone through his fading days. Give to others, even as you decline. In Tuesdays with Morrie, he showed me that true fulfillment comes from offering love, wisdom, and presence, no matter how little you have left. Let me share the moments that brought this lesson to life. The fifth Tuesday, a house full of giving. On our fifth Tuesday, Morrie's home was alive with visitors, friends, colleagues, former students, drawn to his side not out of pity, but because he was still giving. Despite needing help to eat or move, Morrie listened to their stories, offered advice, and shared his warmth. His study, with its bookshelves and hardwood floor, felt like a haven. As I watched him, propped in his wheelchair, his eyes bright despite his frailty, I marveled at his generosity. "Mitch," he said, his voice high and sing-song, "giving makes me feel alive. It's not about what I can't do. It's about what I can still offer." He compared himself to a teacher who never stops teaching, even as the classroom changes. Morrie's giving wasn't new. Back at Brandeis in the 1970s, when I was a scrappy student in gray sweatshirts, he'd been a giver, spending hours with me under trees, discussing life, never rushing me out of his cluttered office. He ran discussion groups, danced alone in Harvard Square, and poured his energy into a project called Greenhouse to help the poor. Now, with ALS stripping his body, he gave in new ways. He insisted on feeding me during our visits, watching with a smile as his helper, Connie, brought out bread, tomatoes, and chicken salad. "Eat, Mitch," he'd say, as if nourishing me fed his soul. His selflessness humbled me, especially as I reflected on my own life. Hoarding time for work, giving little to those I loved, like my wife, Janine, or my estranged brother, Peter. The living funeral, giving by receiving. One of Morrie's most profound acts of giving came before I re-entered his life, in an event he called his living funeral. In 1995, when he could still sit among loved ones, Morrie gathered friends and family to celebrate his life while he was alive. Society expects us to save our tributes for after death, but Morrie, ever the teacher, wanted to give his loved ones a chance to express their love and to receive it. On a cold Sunday, they shared stories, tears, and laughter. A woman read a poem, calling Morrie a tender sequoia, capturing his enduring strength. Morrie cried, laughed, and listened, giving them the gift of his presence, his openness. "I got to hear how I mattered," he told me later, his eyes sparkling. "That's my gift to them, and theirs to me." This living funeral was Morrie giving even as he declined, creating a moment of connection that defied his illness. By receiving their love, he gave them closure, a chance to say what's often left unsaid. It struck me deeply. I'd been avoiding Peter, who was battling cancer in Spain, unsure how to reach out. Morrie's example showed me that giving doesn't require strength, it requires heart. His living funeral inspired me to later call Peter, to give him my love despite the distance, leading to a quirky fact signed Sortush that rekindled our bond. The 9th Tuesday, giving wisdom amid weakness. By our 9th Tuesday, Morrie's decline was stark. His legs were useless, his hands trembled, and he struggled to breathe. Yet he leaned forward at his dining room table, eyes locked on mine, and gave me a lesson on love. Love is how you stay alive, even after you are gone. His words were a gift, not just to me, but to the world. Morrie knew his time was short, yet he poured his wisdom into our talks, hoping I'd share them. "This is our thesis, Mitch," he said, smiling, referring to the book we'd create. He gave me aphorisms, nuggets like "love each other or die," knowing they'd outlive him. Morrie's giving extended beyond me. He welcomed strangers' letters, read to him by Connie, from people moved by his Nightline interviews. He shared his story with Ted Koppel, offering hope to viewers facing their own struggles. Even as he weakened, he listened to visitors' problems, offering insights despite his pain. "When I give, I feel like I'm still here," he said. I thought of my own selfishness, how I'd prioritized my career over Janine, how I'd given little to my community. Morrie's example challenged me to give more, even when I felt I had nothing left. The 14th Tuesday, a final gift of love. Our final Tuesday, just days before Morrie's death, was his ultimate act of giving. He lay in bed, his body frail, his whiskers white against his sunken cheeks. His voice was a whisper, his breath labored, yet he gave me his full attention. "My dear friend," he rasped, his eyes teary but warm. I held his fragile hands, feeling them slip away, and said, "Coach, I don't know how to say goodbye." He patted my hand, placed it on his heart, and whispered, "This is how we say goodbye. Love you." In his weakest moment, Morrie gave me love, reassurance, and a lesson in courage. He didn't hide his tears or his fear. He gave me his truth, raw and real. That moment was a gift I'll never forget. As I kissed his cheek, lingering to offer comfort, I felt him giving me strength, even as his own faded. Morrie died on November 4th, 1995, alone in his bed, as if sparing his family the pain of his final breath. At his funeral, on a windy Tuesday, I stood by his grave, imagining our talks as he'd asked, "You talk, I'll listen." His selflessness lived on, urging me to give more, to Peter, to Janine, to the world. Morrie's lesson, "Give to others, even as you decline," changed me. After his death, I reached out to Peter, giving him my love, which opened a small but precious connection. I began to see my life differently, questioning my focus on work over giving to those I cared about. Morrie's acts of giving, from his living funeral to his final words, showed that true wealth lies in what you offer, not what you keep. His mantra, "Giving makes me feel alive," echoes in Tuesdays with Morrie, touching millions since 1997. Morrie's classroom lives on, inviting us to give love, time, wisdom, no matter our circumstances. So, look at your own life, at the petals dropping, and ask, what can you give today? Because, as Morrie taught me, giving keeps us alive, even as we fade. 5. Create your own culture. Morrie rejected the competitive, materialistic American culture. Instead, he built his own values around community, compassion, and inner peace. The late afternoon light cast a warm glow across Morrie Schwartz's study, where a hibiscus plant by the window shed its pink petals, marking time's quiet passage. It was 1995, and every Tuesday, I, Mitch Albom, a sports journalist caught in ambition's relentless churn, sat with my old college professor in West Newton, Massachusetts. Morrie, my coach, was dying of ALS, his body frail but his spirit a blazing fire, his words piercing my cluttered life. Among his lessons, one resonated deeply: create your own culture. In a world that bombards us with messages of wealth, status, and conformity, Morrie urged me to build a life based on my own values: love, community, and being human. In Tuesdays with Morrie, he showed me how to forge a personal culture that defies the world's shallow script. Let me take you through the moments that brought this lesson to life. The first Tuesday, rejecting society's script. Our first Tuesday was a wake-up call. I arrived at Morrie's home frazzled, my mind tangled with deadlines, phone calls, and the weight of my Detroit sports writer's life. Morrie, propped in his wheelchair, his eyes twinkling despite his trembling frame, asked, "Mitch, are you at peace?" I squirmed. Peace. I was too busy chasing success, writing columns, appearing on TV, filling a big house with stuff, to even think about it. Morrie saw through my chaos. "The culture we have does not make people feel good about themselves," he said, his voice steady. "And you have been taught to be running all the time to achieve success. We're in a society teaching us to chase money, power, fame. If it doesn't work for you, don't buy it. Create your own." Morrie had lived this truth for decades. In the 1970s, when I was a student at Brandeis, he was a quirky professor, dancing alone to Jimi Hendrix in a Harvard Square church, hosting discussion groups on human connection, and working on Greenhouse, a project to help the poor. He didn't care about climbing academic or social ladders or amassing wealth. His office was a cozy clutter of books, ideas, and open doors for students like me. Now, with ALS robbing him from his strength, he was even more resolute. He refused to conform to society's expectation that he should hide his illness or fade quietly. Instead, he made his dying a public act of teaching, inviting friends over, sharing his story on Nightline with Ted Koppel, and urging me to build a culture of love and meaning over the world's empty promises. The 10th Tuesday, building a subculture. On our 10th Tuesday, Morrie's lesson hit home. We talked about marriage, But the conversation shifted to how society's culture threatens us, telling us we're not enough, rich enough, or successful enough. I admitted I'd been sidelining my wife, Janine, prioritizing work over our love. Morrie nodded, unsurprised. People are only mean when they're threatened, he said, and that's what our culture does. That's what our economy does. He urged me to create my own little subculture, a way of life rooted in what mattered to me. For Morrie, this meant a life of connection, his discussion groups, his walks with friends, his open heart for students like me in the 1970s. Even now, his home was a sanctuary of love, with friends visiting, his wife, Charlotte, offering quiet strength, and his sons, Rob and John, standing by him. Morrie's subculture was deliberate. He told me a story from his childhood, when his mother died, and society pressured him to move on, to be strong. Instead, he honored his grief, shaping a culture of emotional honesty. Now, with ALS, he lived the same way, refusing to pretend he was fine. I'm not what the world expects, he said, and that's my freedom. His words made me question my own life, my big house on a hill, my endless work hours. Was I building a culture of my own, or just following society's script? Morrie's example pushed me to rethink my priorities, to start giving more to Janine and my community. The Living Funeral, a culture of connection. One of Morrie's boldest acts of creating his own culture was his living funeral, described early in the book. In 1995, when he could still sit among loved ones, Morrie gathered friends and family to celebrate his life while he was alive. Society expects us to save tributes for after death, to mourn in silence. Morrie rejected that. On a cold Sunday, his guests shared stories, tears, and laughter. A woman read a poem, calling him a tender sequoia, capturing his gentle strength. Morrie cried, laughed, and listened, building a moment of raw connection. I got to hear how I mattered, he told me later, his eyes bright. Why wait? This living funeral was Morrie's culture in action, a culture of love, presence, and defiance of social norms. He didn't care if it seemed unconventional. He wanted to create a space where people could be real, where love could flow freely. It hit me hard. I'd been avoiding my brother, Peter, who was battling cancer in Spain, unsure how to bridge our distance. Morrie's living funeral inspired me to reach out, to create my own moment of connection by telling Peter I loved him, leading to a quirky fact signed Sortush that felt like a small victory. The 13th Tuesday, a culture of presence. By our 13th Tuesday, Morrie was bedridden, his breathing labored, his body a shadow of the vibrant man I'd known. Yet he was still creating his culture, one of presence and meaning. We talked about his perfect day, not a lavish trip or grand achievement, but simple joys, eating sweet rolls, swimming, walking in a garden, and dancing with friends until exhaustion. That's what I'd do, he whispered, his voice faint but clear. His vision was a rejection of society's obsession with bigger, better, more. Instead, he crafted a culture of small, human moments, shared with those he loved. Morrie's presence was his gift. Even as he declined, he gave his full attention to visitors, listened to their problems, and shared aphorisms like, love each other or die. He read letters from strangers, moved by his Nightline interviews, and offered hope through his story. This is my culture, he told me, one where people matter. I compared it to my own life, filled with work and distraction, and felt a pang of shame. Morrie's example urged me to slow down, to create a culture where Janine, Peter, and my community came first. The 14th Tuesday, a final act of culture. Our final Tuesday, days before Morrie's death, was his culture at its purest. He lay in bed, pale and childlike, his whiskers white against sunken cheeks. His voice was a whisper, but his eyes held no pretense. My dear friend, he rasped, affirming our bond. I held his fragile hands, saying, Coach, I don't know how to say goodbye. He patted my hand, placed it on his heart, and whispered, This is how we say goodbye. Love you. In his final moments, Morrie created a culture of love, raw and real, rejecting society's call for stoicism. His tears, his truth, were his gift to me. Morrie died on November 4th, 1995, alone in his bed, as if choosing a quiet exit. At his funeral, on a windy Tuesday, I stood by his grave, imagining our talks as he'd asked, You talk, I'll listen. His culture of connection, defiance, love, lived on, challenging me to build my own. I started with Peter, whose facts was a step toward a new way of living. Morrie's lesson, create your own culture, reshaped me. After his death, I questioned my chase for society's approval, my neglect of Janine, my distance from Peter. Morrie's examples, from his living funeral to his perfect day, showed that a true culture is built on love, presence, and authenticity, not wealth or status. His words, if the culture doesn't work, don't buy it, echo in Tuesdays with Morrie, inspiring millions since 1997 to forge their own paths. Morrie's classroom lives on, urging us to reject society's script and build a life that's ours. So, look at your hibiscus petals and ask, what culture are you creating? Because, as Morrie taught me, it's your legacy that endures. 6. Forgive yourself and others. Letting go of regrets and resentments is essential for peace. Morrie believed it was never too late to say, I'm sorry, or I forgive you, even if it's to yourself. The study was bathed in soft light, a hibiscus plant by the window shedding its pink petals like whispers of letting go. It was 1995, and every Tuesday, I, Mitch Albom, a sports journalist drowning in ambition, sat with my old college professor, Morrie Schwartz, in West Newton, Massachusetts. Morrie, my coach, was dying of ALS, his body fading but his spirit radiant, his words slicing through my restless life. Among his lessons, one hit me hardest, forgive yourself and others. In a world heavy with regrets and grudges, Morrie showed me that forgiveness is the key to freedom, a way to heal before time runs out. In Tuesdays with Morrie, his acts of forgiveness were a roadmap to peace. Let me share the moments that taught me to let go. The third Tuesday, releasing regret. On our third Tuesday, Morrie's study felt like a sanctuary, its bookshelves and warm light a refuge from my chaos of deadlines and distractions. He was weaker now, his legs unsteady, but his eyes held mine as he spoke about regrets. Don't let go too soon, but don't hang on too long, he said, his voice gentle yet firm. He shared a story from his past, about a friend named Norman, an artist who'd made sculptures for Morrie and his wife, Charlotte. After a misunderstanding, Norman's wife had upset Charlotte. Morrie cut him off, too proud to reconcile. When Norman died of cancer, Morrie was left with a wound that never healed. I never got to forgive him, he said, his voice cracking. Don't wait, Mitch. Not everyone gets the time I'm getting. Morrie's regret was a lesson in forgiving others. He urged me to let go of grudges, to act before it's too late. I thought of my brother, Peter, battling cancer in Spain, dodging my calls. I'd been hurt by his distance, holding on to resentment for his independence. Morrie's story nudged me to forgive Peter, to reach out despite my pride. Later, after Morrie's death, I did, telling Peter I loved him, receiving a quirky fax signed Sore Tush that began to mend our rift. Morrie's lesson was clear. Forgiveness isn't just for others, it's for your own peace. The 12th Tuesday, forgiving yourself. By our 12th Tuesday, Morrie was confined to his recliner, his body failing, his hands lifeless as I massaged his calloused feet. We talked about forgiveness again, but this time, he turned the focus inward. Forgive yourself before you die, then forgive others, he said, his eyes intense. He admitted to his own struggles, regrets over pride, like with Norman, or moments he hadn't been the father or husband he wanted to be. But he'd learned to make peace with himself, to accept his imperfections. You can't get stuck on the regrets of what should have happened, he said. You have to love yourself to move forward. This was a harder lesson for me. I carried guilt over losing touch with Morrie for 16 years, over neglecting Janine for my career, over not being there for Peter. Morrie saw my turmoil. Mitch, you're too hard on yourself, he said, his voice soft. If I could have had another son, I would have liked it to be you. His words were a gift, a call to forgive myself for my shortcomings. They stayed with me, pushing me to ease the weight I carried, to see myself as Morrie did, a raw but precious thing, worthy of grace. The 13th Tuesday, forgiveness as love. On our 13th Tuesday, Morrie was bedridden, his breathing labored, his voice a whisper. We talked about my brother, Peter, and the wall between us. Morrie sensed my pain without me saying much. Love is when you are as concerned about someone else's situation as you are about your own, he said. He urged me to forgive Peter, not just for his distance, but for the hurt it caused me. Forgiveness, he showed me, was an act of love, a way to rebuild connection despite pain. He spoke of his own family, how he'd forgiven small slights to keep his bond with Charlotte, Rob, and John strong. There's no formula for relationships, he said, but forgiveness is the glue. Morrie's example was powerful. Even as he declined, he gave forgiveness freely, listening to visitors' troubles, offering understanding despite his own suffering. He forgave the world's indifference, its obsession with money over meaning, choosing instead to share love through his aphorisms and nightline interviews. His forgiveness created a culture of compassion, one I wanted to emulate. It inspired me to call Peter after Morrie's death, to let go of resentment and offer love, a step that opened our hearts to each other. The 14th Tuesday, a final act of forgiveness. Our final Tuesday, days before Morrie's death, was forgiveness in its purest form. Morrie lay in bed, his face pale, his whiskers white against sunken cheeks. His voice was barely audible, but his eyes held no bitterness, only love. "My dear friend," he rasped, forgiving my years of absence, my initial reluctance to face his illness. I held his fragile hands, saying, "Coach, I don't know how to say goodbye." He patted my hand, placed it on his heart, and whispered, "This is how we say goodbye. Love you." In his weakest moment, Morrie forgave me, himself, and the world, offering love as his final act. His forgiveness was a lesson in letting go. He didn't cling to regrets or grudges, even as death neared. Instead, he gave me permission to forgive myself for not visiting sooner, for my ambition-driven life. As I kissed his cheek, tears falling, I felt his forgiveness wash over me, a gift that eased my guilt. Morrie died on November 4th, 1995, alone in his bed, as if sparing his family pain. At his funeral, on a windy Tuesday, I stood by his grave, imagining our talks as he'd asked, "You talk, I'll listen." His forgiveness lived on, urging me to heal my own wounds and those with others. Morrie's lesson, "Forgive yourself and others," changed me. After his death, I forgave Peter, reaching out with love that sparked a new connection. I began to forgive myself, easing the guilt over my lost years with Morrie, my neglect of Janine. Morrie's examples, from his regret over Norman to his final goodbye, showed that forgiveness is a bridge to peace, a way to live fully despite pain. His words, "Forgive yourself before you die," echo in Tuesdays with Morrie, touching millions since 1997. Morrie's classroom lives on, inviting us to let go of grudges, to embrace grace. So, look at your own hibiscus petals and ask, who can you forgive today? Because, as Morrie taught me, forgiveness sets us free. 7. The power of presence. Morrie showed that being fully present, with your heart, attention, and silence, is one of the greatest gifts you can give another person. The study was a quiet haven, sunlight filtering through a window where a hibiscus plant shed its pink petals, each one a soft reminder of time's fleeting nature. It was 1995, and every Tuesday, I, Mitch Albom, a sports journalist lost in the frenzy of ambition, sat with my old college professor, Morrie Schwartz, in West Newton, Massachusetts. Morrie, my coach, was dying of ALS, his body weakening, but his spirit glowed, his words pulling me into the moment. Among his lessons, one stood out, the power of presence. In a world of distractions, deadlines, status, noise, Morrie showed me that being fully present is the heart of a meaningful life. In Tuesdays with Morrie, his moments of presence were a gift that changed me. Let me share the moments that taught me to be here, now. The 6th Tuesday, living in the moment. On our 6th Tuesday, Morrie's study felt like a cocoon, its bookshelves and warm light shielding us from my chaotic life of phone calls and spilled coffee. Morrie, weaker now, his legs useless, spoke with a clarity that stopped me cold. "Once you learn how to die, you learn how to live," he said, his blue-green eyes steady. He explained that accepting death made him present, freeing him from society's distractions, money, fame, the next big thing. "Most people don't believe they're going to die," he said, "so they're half asleep, chasing things that don't matter." Morrie was awake, savoring every bite of food, every friend's voice, every petal on his hibiscus plant. He shared his morning ritual, detaching to feel his emotions, fear, sadness, gratitude, then letting them go to focus on the now. I'm more alive because of it, he said, smiling faintly. I thought of my own life, always rushing, planning the next article, barely noticing Janine or my surroundings. Morrie's presence was a lesson. To live fully, you must be here. His example nudged me to slow down, to listen when he spoke, to feel the weight of our time together. The fifth Tuesday, presence through listening. By our fifth Tuesday, Morrie's home buzzed with visitors, friends, colleagues, students, drawn to his presence. Despite needing help to eat or move, he gave them his full attention, listening to their joys and fears. As I watched him, propped in his wheelchair, his eyes bright, I realized this was presence in action. Mitch, he said, when you listen, really listen, you give someone the gift of being seen. He'd always been this way. In the 1970s at Brandeis, when I was a scrappy student, Morrie spent hours with me under trees, his egg salad flying as he listened to my dreams of being a musician. Now, with ALS, he listened even as he struggled to breathe. One visitor, a woman, shared her troubles, and Morrie, though frail, nodded, asked questions, and offered wisdom. I feel alive when I'm here for others, he told me. His presence transformed his study into a space of connection. I compared it to my own distracted life, how I'd half listen to Janine, my mind on work. Morrie's example made me want to be present, to truly hear those I loved, like my brother, Peter, who was battling cancer in Spain and avoiding my calls. The living funeral, presence in celebration. One of Morrie's most vivid acts of presence was his living funeral, described early in the book. In 1995, when he could still sit among loved ones, Morrie gathered friends and family to celebrate his life while he was alive. Society expects us to save tributes for after death, but Morrie chose to be present for the love he'd given. On a cold Sunday, his guests shared stories, tears, and laughter. A woman read a poem, calling him a tender sequoia, capturing his strength and gentleness. Morrie was there, fully, crying, laughing, listening. I got to feel their love, he told me later, his eyes sparkling. That's living. This living funeral was presence at its peak. Morrie didn't dwell on his illness or future loss. He was in the moment, soaking in connection. It struck me deeply. I'd been avoiding Peter, unsure how to face his cancer. Morrie's example inspired me to be present with him, to call and say, I love you, leading to a quirky fact signed Sore Tush that felt like a shared moment. Morrie showed me that presence creates memories that outlast time. The 13th Tuesday, presence in simplicity. On our 13th Tuesday, Morrie was bedridden, his breathing labored, his voice a whisper. Yet he was present, describing his perfect day, eating sweet rolls, swimming, walking in a garden, dancing with friends until exhaustion. That's enough for me, he said, his eyes soft. It wasn't grand or flashy, just simple, human moments. His presence in these imagined joys rejected society's push for more, bigger, better. Instead, he was here, savoring what mattered: love, connection, sensation. Morrie's presence extended to me. Despite his pain, he asked about Peter, sensing my worry. Be there for him, he whispered, giving me his full attention. He read letters from strangers, moved by his Nightline interviews, and shared hope through his story. This is what I can do now, he said. I thought of my own absence, how I'd been physically with Janine but mentally elsewhere. Morrie's example urged me to be present, to show up fully for those I loved. The 14th Tuesday, presence until the end. Our final Tuesday, days before Morrie's death, was presence in its purest form. Morrie lay in bed, pale and childlike, his whiskers white against sunken cheeks. His voice was barely audible, but his eyes locked onto mine. My dear friend, he rasped, fully present despite his fading body. I held his fragile hands, saying, Coach, I don't know how to say goodbye. He patted my hand, placed it on his heart, and whispered, This is how we say goodbye. Love you. In that moment, Morrie was there, tears falling, love shining, giving me his heart. His presence was a gift. He didn't retreat into fear or distraction. He stayed with me, making our goodbye sacred. As I kissed his cheek, lingering, I felt his presence linger too, a bond unbroken by death. Morrie died on November 4th, 1995, alone in his bed, as if choosing a quiet exit. At his funeral, on a windy Tuesday, I stood by his grave, imagining our talks as he'd asked, "You talk, I'll listen." His presence lived on, urging me to be here, now. Morrie's lesson, the power of presence, changed me. After his death, I reached out to Peter, being present with my love, sparking a connection through his facts. I began to show up for Janine, listening fully, letting go of distractions. Morrie's moments of presence, from his living funeral to his final goodbye, showed that being here is the essence of life. His words, "Learn how to live, and you'll know how to die," echo in Tuesdays with Morrie, touching millions since 1997. Morrie's classroom lives on, inviting us to be present, to cherish the now. So, look at your hibiscus petals and ask, are you here? Because, as Morrie taught me, presence is love that endures. 8. Embrace emotion, then let it go. Rather than avoiding feelings like fear, sadness, or grief, Morrie encourages us to dive into them fully, then detach once we've honored them. The study was a quiet sanctuary, sunlight filtering through a window where a hibiscus plant shed its pink petals, each one a gentle marker of time's passage. It was 1995, and every Tuesday, I, Mitch Albom, a sports journalist consumed by ambition's relentless pace, sat with my old college professor, Morrie Schwartz, in West Newton, Massachusetts. Morrie, my coach, was dying of ALS, his body frail but his spirit vibrant, his words pulling me into a deeper way of living. Among his lessons, one resonated profoundly: embrace emotion, then let it go. In a world that often numbs or clings to feelings, Morrie taught me to feel fully and release, finding peace in the present. In Tuesdays with Morrie, his approach to emotions was a guide to freedom. Let me share the moments that taught me this dance of feeling. The 6th Tuesday, detaching with love. On our 6th Tuesday, Morrie's study felt like a haven, its bookshelves and warm light a shield from my chaotic life of deadlines and distractions. Morrie, weaker now, his legs lifeless, spoke with a clarity that stopped me. You know what the Buddhists say? Don't cling to things, because everything is impermanent, he said, his blue-green eyes steady. He described his morning ritual of detachment, sitting alone, letting his emotions, fear of dying, sadness for his losses, gratitude for his life, wash over him. I dive into the feeling, I experience it fully, he said. Then I say, okay, I know you. Now I can let you go. This practice kept Morrie present, free from being consumed by any one emotion. If you hold back on the emotions, you're never going to be a full person, he told me. He was living proof, crying openly when he spoke of his family, laughing at his own frailties, then moving on to savor the moment. A bite of food, a friend's voice, the hibiscus petals. I thought of my own life, how I buried emotions under work, avoiding the pain of my brother Peter's cancer or my guilt over neglecting Janine. Morrie's example urged me to feel, not flee, but also to release, not cling. The living funeral, feeling it all. One of Morrie's most powerful demonstrations of embracing emotion was his living funeral, described early in the book. In 1995, when he could still sit among loved ones, Morrie gathered friends and family to celebrate his life while he was alive. Society often expects us to suppress emotions until after death, but Morrie dove in. On a cold Sunday, his guests shared stories, tears, and laughter. A woman read a poem, calling him a tender sequoia, capturing his strength and gentleness. Morrie cried freely, laughed heartily, and let every emotion flow. Joy, sadness, love. Then let them go, staying present in the moment. I felt their love, he told me later, his eyes bright. And I let it fill me, then pass through. This living funeral was Morrie embracing emotion without being trapped by it. He didn't dwell on his illness or fear of death. He felt them, then released them to connect with those around him. It hit me hard. I'd been dodging Peter, afraid of the grief his cancer stirred in me. Morrie's example inspired me to face those feelings, to call Peter and say, I love you, letting the fear and love flow, leading to a quirky fact signed Sore Tush that felt like a shared release. Morrie showed me that embracing emotion, then letting go, creates space for connection. The ninth Tuesday, tears and laughter. By our ninth Tuesday, Morrie's decline was stark. His hands trembled. His breathing was labored. Yet he embraced his emotions with grace. As we sat at his dining room table, he spoke of love, his voice cracking with tears as he said, "Love is how you stay alive, even after you are gone." Moments later, he chuckled at a memory of dancing to Jimi Hendrix, his eyes sparkling. He didn't shy from sadness or joy. He felt them fully, then moved on. "Mitch, don't be afraid to cry," he said. "It's part of being human. But don't let it own you." Morrie's emotional openness was a lesson. He cried over his regrets, like losing his friend Norman, but let the guilt go to focus on the present. He laughed with visitors, even as he struggled, then released the moment to listen to their stories. His home was a hub of feeling. His wife, Charlotte, his sons, Rob and John, all part of his emotional tapestry. I compared it to my own guarded heart, how I'd suppressed worry for Peter or love for Janine to keep working. Morrie's example pushed me to feel those emotions, to let tears fall, then release them to be present with those I cared about. The 14th Tuesday, a final embrace. Our final Tuesday, days before Morrie's death, was the ultimate expression of embracing emotion. Morrie lay in bed, his face pale, his whiskers white against sunken cheeks. His voice was a whisper, but his eyes were alive with feeling. "My dear friend," he rasped, tears welling as he called me by our bond. I held his fragile hands, my own tears falling, and said, "Coach, I don't know how to say goodbye." He patted my hand, placed it on his heart, and whispered, "This is how we say goodbye. Love you." Morrie felt the weight of our farewell, sadness, love, gratitude, then let it go, his gaze peaceful. His emotional presence was a gift. He didn't cling to fear or sorrow. He embraced them, then released them, giving me a moment of pure connection. As I kissed his cheek, lingering, I felt his emotions merge with mine, then pass, leaving love. Morrie died on November 4th, 1995, alone in his bed, as if choosing a quiet exit. At his funeral, on a windy Tuesday, I stood by his grave, imagining our talks as he'd asked, "You talk, I'll listen." His lesson of embracing emotion lived on, urging me to feel fully, then let go. Morrie's lesson, embrace emotion, then let it go, changed me. After his death, I faced my feelings for Peter, letting fear and love flow, sparking a connection through his facts. I began to feel openly with Janine, releasing guilt to be present. Morrie's moments, from his living funeral to his final goodbye, showed that feeling fully, then releasing, is the path to peace. His words, "Don't cling, because everything is impermanent," echo in Tuesdays with Morrie, touching millions since 1997. Morrie's classroom lives on, inviting us to dive into our emotions, then let them go. So, look at your hibiscus petals and ask, what can you feel today? Because, as Morrie taught me, embracing emotion sets us free. 9. Aging is growth, not decline. Morrie viewed aging not as decay, but as progress toward wisdom. Each stage of life brings lessons. To envy youth is to miss the richness of now. The study was a warm haven, sunlight spilling through a window where a hibiscus plant shed its pink petals, each one a quiet nod to time's gentle march. It was 1995, and every Tuesday, I, Mitch Albom, a sports journalist caught in ambition's whirlwind, sat with my old college professor, Morrie Schwartz, in West Newton, Massachusetts. Morrie, my coach, was dying of ALS, his body frail but his spirit alight, his words cutting through my restless life. Among his lessons, one shifted my perspective. Aging is growth, not decline. In a world obsessed with youth, Morrie taught me to see aging as a journey of wisdom, connection, and richness. In Tuesdays with Morrie, his embrace of age was a beacon of hope. Let me share the moments that taught me to cherish growing older. The 7th Tuesday, embracing the years. On our 7th Tuesday, Morrie's study felt like a sanctuary, its bookshelves and soft light a refuge from my chaotic world of deadlines and distractions. Morrie, now unable to walk or dance, sat in his wheelchair, his hands trembling but his eyes bright. We talked about aging, a topic I dreaded at 37, already noticing my thinning hair and society's pressure to stay young. "Mitch, if you're always battling against getting older, You're always going to be unhappy, he said, his voice firm yet kind. Aging is not just decay, you know. It's growth. Morrie lived this truth. At 78, with ALS stealing his strength, he saw himself as richer, not diminished. I'm more interesting now, he said, smiling. I've lived more, loved more, learned more. He rejected society's youth obsession, anti-wrinkle creams, eternal fitness, hiding vulnerabilities. Instead, he let his white whiskers grow, spoke openly about his physical decline, and found joy in his wisdom. The young are not wise, he said. They have very little understanding about life. Who wants to live every day when you don't know what's going on? His perspective stunned me. I'd been chasing youth, fearing age, but Morrie showed me that growing older meant growing deeper. The fifth Tuesday, wisdom through time. By our fifth Tuesday, Morrie's home was alive with visitors, friends, students, colleagues, drawn to his presence. Despite needing help to eat or move, he offered insights honed by years of living. As I watched him listen to a woman's troubles, nodding with understanding, I saw aging as growth in action. Mitch, every age has its lessons, he told me later. When I was your age, I was ambitious, like you. Now, I know what matters: love, community, being human. His years had taught him to prioritize connection over status, a wisdom he shared freely. Morrie's past amplified this. In the 1970s at Brandeis, when I was a student, he was in his 50s, vibrant but already seasoned, spending hours with me under trees, discussing life over egg salad sandwiches. He ran discussion groups, danced to Jimi Hendrix, and worked on Greenhouse to help the poor, acts of a man growing through experience. Now, with ALS, he leaned on that growth, teaching me that age brings clarity. I thought of my own life, how I chased fleeting achievements, ignoring the wisdom I could gain with time. Morrie's example urged me to see aging as a chance to grow, not shrink. The living funeral, celebrating a full life. One of Morrie's most vivid examples of aging as growth was his living funeral, described early in the book. In 1995, when he could still sit among loved ones, Morrie, then in his late 70s, gathered friends and family to celebrate his life. Society often fears aging, hiding its marks, but Morrie embraced his years. On a cold Sunday, his guests shared stories, tears, and laughter. A woman read a poem, calling him a tender sequoia, capturing his enduring strength. Morrie was fully present, crying, laughing, reflecting on a life rich with love and lessons. I've had a good run, he told me later, his eyes sparkling. Why not celebrate it? This living funeral was Morrie seeing his age as a triumph, not a tragedy. He didn't mourn lost youth. He celebrated the growth his years brought, friendships, family, impact. It hit me deeply. I'd been avoiding my brother, Peter, battling cancer in Spain, fearing the pain of his illness and my own aging. Morrie's example inspired me to embrace my years, to reach out to Peter with love, leading to a quirky fact signed Sortush that felt like a shared moment of growth. Morrie showed me that aging is a canvas for connection, painted richer with time. The 14th Tuesday, growth until the end. Our final Tuesday, days before Morrie's death, was aging as growth in its purest form. Morrie lay in bed, his body childlike, his whiskers white against sunken cheeks. His voice was a whisper, but his eyes held the wisdom of his years. My dear friend, he rasped, affirming our bond. I held his fragile hands, saying, Coach, I don't know how to say goodbye. He patted my hand, placed it on his heart, and whispered, This is how we say goodbye. Love you. Even at the end, Morrie was growing, deeper in love, richer in presence, unafraid of his age or mortality. His final moments were a testament to aging's gifts. He didn't cling to youth or fear decline. He embraced the wisdom his years had given him, sharing it with me. As I kissed his cheek, tears falling, I felt his growth touch me, urging me to see my own aging as a journey forward. Morrie died on November 4th, 1995, alone in his bed, as if choosing a quiet exit. At his funeral, on a windy Tuesday, I stood by his grave, imagining our talks as he'd asked, You talk, I'll listen. His vision of aging lived on, challenging me to grow through my years. Morrie's lesson, aging is growth, not decline, changed me. After his death, I reached out to Peter, embracing my years to build connection, sparked by his facts. I began to see my life with Janine as a chance to grow wiser, not older. Morrie's moments, from his living funeral to his final goodbye, showed that aging is a gift of depth and meaning. His words, "Aging is growth," echo in Tuesdays with Morrie, touching millions since 1997. Morrie's classroom lives on, inviting us to embrace our years as opportunities to grow. So, look at your hibiscus petals and ask, how are you growing today? Because, as Morrie taught me, aging is a journey of becoming. 10. Death ends a life, not a relationship. Even after people die, love endures. Memories, lessons, and emotional bonds can live on and continue to shape us. The study was a quiet haven, sunlight filtering through a window where a hibiscus plant shed its pink petals, each one a soft reminder of life's fleeting nature. It was 1995, and every Tuesday, I, Mitch Albom, a sports journalist lost in ambition's churn, sat with my old college professor, Morrie Schwartz, in West Newton, Massachusetts. Morrie, my coach, was dying of ALS, his body fading but his spirit radiant, his words anchoring me in what truly mattered. Among his lessons, one touched me deeply. Death ends a life, not a relationship. In a world that fears death as a final severing, Morrie taught me that love and connection endure. In Tuesdays with Morrie, his belief in lasting bonds was a gift that changed me. Let me share the moments that showed me love outlives loss. The 13th Tuesday, love's continuity. On our 13th Tuesday, Morrie was bedridden, his breathing labored, his voice a whisper. The room felt heavy with the nearness of death, yet his eyes held a calm certainty. We talked about my brother, Peter, battling cancer in Spain, and my fear of losing him. Morrie sensed my pain. As long as we can love each other and remember the feeling of love we had, we can die without ever really going away, he said, his words soft but profound. He believed death ended his physical life, but not the relationships he'd built. All the love you created is still there, he said. You live on, in the hearts of everyone you have touched. Morrie lived this belief. He spoke of his wife, Charlotte, and sons, Rob and John, with a love that felt eternal. He wasn't religious in a traditional sense, but he trusted that his connection with them would persist through memory and feeling. His words hit me hard. I'd been avoiding Peter, afraid his death would end our bond. Morrie's lesson gave me hope that our love could endure, pushing me to reach out later, leading to a quirky fact signed Sortush that felt like a bridge beyond loss. The living funeral, a bond beyond death. One of Morrie's most powerful examples of this philosophy was his living funeral, described early in the book. In 1995, when he could still sit among loved ones, Morrie gathered friends and family to celebrate his life. Society often saves tributes for after death, but Morrie wanted to strengthen his relationships while he could. On a cold Sunday, his guests shared stories, tears, and laughter. A woman read a poem, calling him a tender sequoia, capturing his enduring presence. Morrie cried, laughed, and listened, soaking in their love. I got to feel how I live in them, he told me later, his eyes bright. That's what stays. This living funeral was Morrie ensuring his relationships would outlast his life. By creating a moment of connection, he planted his love in their hearts, knowing it would endure. It struck me deeply. I'd feared losing Morrie, but his example showed me our bond could continue through the lessons he gave me. It inspired me to call Peter to build a connection that could survive his illness, a step that began to heal our distance. The 9th Tuesday, love as legacy. By our 9th Tuesday, Morrie's decline was stark. His hands trembled, his breathing was strained. Yet he spoke of love with a passion that defied his frailty. Love is how you stay alive, even after you are gone, he said at his dining room table, his voice cracking with emotion. He saw his relationships as his legacy, carried forward by those he'd touched. He gave me aphorisms, love each other or die, hoping I'd share them, keeping his love alive through our thesis, the book we'd create. His bond with me, he believed, would live on in these lessons. Morrie extended this love to others. He welcomed letters from strangers, read by his helper, Connie, moved by his Nightline interviews. He listened to visitors, offering wisdom despite his pain, building connections that would outlast him. I'm in their hearts, he said, smiling. I thought of my own fleeting relationships, how I'd neglected Janine and Peter for work. Morrie's example urged me to nurture bonds that could endure, to invest in love that death couldn't erase. The 14th Tuesday, a goodbye that lives on. Our final Tuesday, days before Morrie's death, was this lesson in its purest form. Morrie lay in bed, his face pale, his whiskers white against sunken cheeks. His voice was barely audible, but his eyes shone with love. "My dear friend," he rasped, affirming our bond. I held his fragile hands, tears falling, and said, "Coach, I don't know how to say goodbye." He patted my hand, placed it on his heart, and whispered, "This is how we say goodbye. Love you." In that moment, Morrie gave me a love that felt timeless, a relationship that death couldn't end. His goodbye was a promise. He didn't fear death's finality. He trusted our connection would live in my heart, in the lessons I'd carry. As I kissed his cheek, lingering, I felt our bond deepen, unbroken by his fading body. Morrie died on November 4th, 1995, alone in his bed, as if sparing his family pain. At his funeral, on a windy Tuesday, I stood by his grave, imagining our talks as he'd asked, "You talk, I'll listen." His love lived on, urging me to keep him close through memory and action. Morrie's lesson, "Death ends a life, not a relationship," changed me. After his death, I reached out to Peter, building a bond through his facts that felt stronger than distance or illness. I nurtured my love with Janine, carrying Morrie's presence in my choices. His moments, from his living funeral to his final goodbye, showed that love endures through memory and impact. His words, "All the love you created is still there," echo in Tuesdays with Morrie, touching millions since 1997. Morrie's classroom lives on, inviting us to cherish relationships that outlast death. So, look at your hibiscus petals and ask, whose love lives in you? Because, as Morrie taught me, love is forever. Tuesdays with Morrie is a gentle, yet powerful meditation on living well and dying without regret. Through Morrie's humility, grace, and unflinching honesty, Albom captures the universal longing to live with purpose. It reminds us that the ultimate teacher is life itself, especially when we listen to those who are leaving it. As Morrie said, "Once you learn how to die, you learn how to live."